Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Former Chinese President Hu Jintao was unexpectedly led out of Saturday's closing ceremony of the Communist Party Congress in a dramatic moment that disrupted the highly choreographed event. Hu's departure was left unexplained, and the nation's censors appeared to quickly scrub any recent references to him from the internet. The Philippines will acquire heavy-lift military helicopters from the U.S., President Marcos Jr. said after scrapping a deal to buy a similar aircraft from Russia. And in the U.S., lawmakers probing the 2021 attack on the Capitol subpoenaed former President Donald Trump to testify on his involvement in the violence in a major escalation of their sprawling inquiry. And researchers at Europe's science lab CERN, who regularly use particle physics to challenge our understanding of the universe, are also applying their craft to push the boundaries of cancer treatment. The physicists here are working with giant particle accelerators in search of ways to expand the reach of cancer radiation therapy and take on hard-to-reach tumors that could otherwise be fatal. First in our news, China's Communist Party endorsed today Xi Jinping's core position in the country's leadership, all but assuring he will be handed an unprecedented third term in power. At the end of the week-long gathering in Beijing, China's ruling party approved a sweeping reshuffle that saw a number of top officials, including Premier Li Keqiang, step down, allowing President Xi to appoint new allies. Xi is now all but certain to be unveiled as General Secretary on Sunday, shortly after the first meeting of the new Central Committee. This will allow Mr. Xi to sail through to a third term as China's president, due to be announced during the government's annual legislative sessions in March. Delegates also on Sunday enshrined into the party's constitution opposition to Taiwanese independence. The party had always pledged to retake the self-ruled democratic island by force if necessary. Now, the largely rubber-stamped meeting of among 2,300 party delegates was meticulously choreographed, with President Xi determined to avoid any surprises as he enshrined his leadership for the next 5 years. But in an unexpected move that punctured the proceedings of the Great Hall of the People, former leader Hu Jintao was led out of the closing ceremony. Hu's departure was left unexplained, and the nation's censors appeared to quickly scrub any recent references to him from the internet. The frail-looking 79-year-old seemed reluctant to leave the front row of proceedings at Beijing's Great Hall of the People, where he was sitting next to President Xi Jinping. A steward attempted to take a sitting Hu by the arm before being shaken off. The steward then attempted to lift Hu up with both hands from under the armpits. After an exchange of about a minute in which Hu spoke briefly with Xi and Premier Li Keqiang, he was led out of the hall. A seated Xi was filmed holding papers down on the desk as Hu tried to grab them. Hu patted Li's shoulder as he left, as most of his colleagues started firmly ahead. Authorities offered no explanation for Hu's exit. Mr. Xi is expected to be officially confirmed for a third term as General Secretary and to unveil his new leadership team. In 2018, he abolished the presidential two-term limit, paving the way for him to rule indefinitely. In other news, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson today returned to Britain from a holiday to launch an audacious political comeback as Conservative leadership rival Rishi Sunak reached the minimum threshold to contest the UK's top job. Johnson cut short a Caribbean trip to join the race to replace outgoing leader Liz Truss, with allies telling British media he was up for it. The divisive 58-year-old Brexit architect only handed over power in early September 2 months after announcing his resignation following a Tory revolt over a slew of scandals. His apparent bid to return to office just weeks later has already been decried by opposition politicians and even some in his own fractured ruling party who argue that both it and the country need stability and unity. The Sunak and Johnson camps are reportedly seeking talks to see if there is scope for a unity deal, although there is plenty of bad blood since the former prime minister's defenestration. Sunak's July resignation as Chancellor of the Exchequer helped trigger the government mutiny that ultimately led to Johnson's ousting. In tonight's other news, far-right leader Giorgia Meloni was named Italian prime minister, becoming the first woman to head a government in Italy. Her post-fascist Brothers of Italy party, Eurosceptic and anti-immigration, won the September 25 legislative polls but needed outside support to form a government. Meloni's appointment is a historic event for the Eurozone's third largest economy and for Brothers of Italy, which has never been in government. Shortly after she was named, the 45-year-old from Rome named her ministers, who will be sworn in on Saturday in front of President Sergio Mattarella. Her Brothers of Italy party won 26% of the vote last month, compared to 8 and 9% respectively for her allies Forza Italia and the Far-Right League. In tonight's other news, the Philippines will acquire heavy-lift military helicopters from the U.S. President Marcos Jr. said after scrapping a deal to buy similar aircraft from Russia. The former President Duterte had signed a deal worth $216 million for 16 Mi-17 helicopters, but backed out in the months following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the imposition of wide-ranging sanctions on Moscow. Take a look.
We have already, the deal with Russia was for some heavy lift helicopters, and now we have secured an alternative supply from the United States through the manufacturer of Poland. In any case, meron na tayong kapalit.
Meanwhile, Russian Ambassador Marat Pavlov, however, was quoted in local media saying the manufacturer was still proceeding with the assembly of the Mi-17s. The Russian embassy in Manila could not be reached for comment. President Marcos did not specify which U.S. helicopter was chosen as the alternative, only that they will be manufactured in Poland. The Philippine ambassador in Washington, Jose Romualdez, told reporters in August that Manila was looking at Chinooks to replace the Mi-17s. Meanwhile, 2 newly acquired Fast Attack Interdiction Craft, or FAIC, have successfully conducted their endurance run that took place from October 12. The Philippine Army reported late Thursday in a Facebook post the Navy's Littoral Combat Force identified the 2 FAIC as the BRP Nestor Acero and the BRP Lolinato Toong. They departed from East Commodore Posadas Wharf, Cavite, en route to the area of operation of Naval Forces West and Naval Forces Central and returned safely to Cavite City, according to the post. These are the first 2 of the 9 FAIC acquired by the Philippines from Israel shipyards for 10 billion pesos. Now, these vessels are named after 2 Philippine Marine Corps heroes and Medal of Valor recipients, the late Private First Class Nestor Acero and the late First Lieutenant Lolinato Toong. In tonight's other news, Russia's defense minister held rare telephone talks with his U.S. counterpart. Few details emerged of the conversation between Russia's Sergei Shoigu and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, but both sides confirmed they had discussed Ukraine. Topical issues of international security, including the situation in Ukraine, were discussed, according to Russia's defense ministry. Secretary Austin emphasized the importance of maintaining lines of communication amid the ongoing war against Ukraine, according to a U.S. military spokesman. It was only the second call between the ministers since Moscow invaded invaded Ukraine on February 24. Back in May, Austin had urged Moscow to implement an immediate ceasefire, and at the time, Russia's invading force had been beaten back from the capital Kiev, but were making steady gains in the eastern Donbass and Kharkiv regions and had consolidated their positions in the south. 6 months on, however, Ukraine's forces have pushed back. Kiev's forces in recent weeks, aided by Western weapons, have been advancing along the west bank of the Dnieper River towards the region's main city of Kherson. Meanwhile, France's permanent envoy to the UN, Nicolas de Riviere, calls on Iran to immediately cease all forms of support to Russia's aggression on Ukraine. Western countries have accused Iran of supplying drones that Moscow is using to carry out its strikes in Ukraine. And the White House said that Iranian personnel were on the ground in Crimea helping Russian forces conduct drone attacks. Take a look.
We can confirm that Russian military personnel based in Crimea have been piloting Iranian UAVs and using them to conduct kinetic strikes across Ukraine, including in strikes against Kyiv in recent days. We assess that Iranian military personnel were on the ground in Crimea and assisted Russia in these operations. Russia has received dozens of these UAVs so far and will likely continue to receive additional shipments in the future.
Now, French ambassador to the UN, Nicolas de Riviere, called on Iran to immediately cease all forms of support to Russia's aggression on Ukraine. Ukraine accused Russia of using 4 Iranian-made drones to bomb Kiev on Monday and said its air defenses have shot down 223 Iranian drones since mid-September. The Kremlin said it has no knowledge of its army using Iranian drones in Ukraine, and Tehran has said that the claims that it is providing Russia with weapons are baseless. Meanwhile, the White House said that Iranian personnel were on the ground in Crimea helping Russian forces conduct drone attacks. However, Russia's UN envoy, Vasily Nebenzia, called the charges another fake news. Take a look.
Сейчас Украина и ее западные покровители пытаются раскрутить еще один фейк о якобы совершенных поставках в Россию иранских БПЛА в нарушение резолюции Совета Безопасности 2231. Отвергаем также любые попытки вовлечь в эту нечистоплотную игру секретариат ООН.
То все, что сейчас делается на треке Ирана, подчинено одной цели — давлению на эту страну со стороны Вашингтона, и Вашингтон мобилизует для этого страны НАТО, страны Евросоюза.
Russia's foreign ministry said the West is seeking to put pressure on Tehran with accusations that Moscow is using Iran-made drones in Ukraine, claims that Russia and Iran deny. Now, Moscow installed authorities in the region accused Kiev's forces of attacking a bridge being used by civilians. 4 people were killed, according to a pro-Moscow official, Kirill Stermesov, on Telegram. Take a look.
Вчера, 20 октября, укронацисты нанесли удар по мирной переправе в городе Херсоне. Вследствие удара 4 погибших среди мирного населения. Стреляли осколочными зарядами специально для того, чтобы убить как можно большее количество гражданских. Было уничтожено около 10 автомобилей гражданского населения. Население будет продолжаться. Поэтому эвакуация — это была та вынужденная мера, про которую мы говорили.
Now, Russian investigators later said that 2 of the dead were journalists and that 13 people had been wounded. A Ukrainian military spokesman, Natalia Gumenyuk, denied Kiev's forces were responsible, saying they did not target local populations. Meanwhile, evacuees from the Russian-controlled Kherson region arrived in the city Dzhankoy, a transport hub in the north of Crimea. Kherson's pro-Kremlin officials said on October 20 that around 15,000 people have been pulled from the territory that Russia said it has annexed in the phase of a Ukrainian advance. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin on Thursday visited a training center for mobilized Russians for the first time since announcing a partial military call-up on September 21. State television showed this Mr. Putin visiting a shooting center in the Ryazan region southeast of Moscow, dressed in black, shooting a newly developed sniper rifle and hugging a military man wearing air protectors, safety glasses. Mr. Putin fired several shots from a Russian SVD sniper rifle lying under a camouflage net. Military officials also showed Mr. Putin what mobilized men are equipped with, presenting him with a line of men, some of them with their rucksacks open to show what they are carrying. The visit comes after reports that mobilized men are badly equipped, leading to some discontent. Russian state-run news agency said the commander-in-chief also observed practical exercises, including fire drills, engineering, and medical trainings. More than 200,000 people have been conscripted into the Russian army since Mr. Putin announced the mobilization drive. In other news, Australia and Japan had agreed to share sensitive intelligence and deepen defense cooperation today, signing a security pact to counter China's military rise. Prime Ministers Fumio Kishida and Anthony Albanese inked the accord in the Western Australian city of Perth, revamping a dusty 15-year-old accord drafted when terrorism and weapons proliferation were the overriding concerns. Take a look.
Shared visit for an Indo-Pacific region that is peaceful, prosperous, resilient and free is why today we have signed the renewed joint declaration on security cooperation. Following our reciprocal access agreement in 2022, this landmark declaration sends a strong signal to the region of our strategic alignment.
Now, under the deal, the country's defense forces will train together in Northern Australia and expand and strengthen cooperation across defense, intelligence sharing, and a raft of other areas. Prime Minister Kishida said the agreement was a response to an increasingly harsh strategic environment without citing China or North Korea by name. Neither Australia nor Japan has the ranks of overseas intelligence operatives and foreign informants needed to play in the major leagues of global espionage. Japan does not have a foreign spy agency equivalent to America's CIA, Britain's MI6, or Russia's FSB. Australia's also is a fraction of the size of those organizations. But according to expert Bryce Wakefield, Australia and Japan have formidable signals and geospatial capabilities, electronic eavesdropping tools, and high-tech satellites that provide invaluable intelligence on adversaries. Back here in the country, Bureau of Corrections Director General Gerald Bantag has been placed under indefinite suspension by Malacanang after the death of an inmate who was allegedly one of the conspirators behind the killing of broadcaster Percival Mabasa, or Percy Lapid. In a press briefing, Department of Justice Secretary Jesus Crispin Remulla said President Marcos directed that Bantag be suspended pending the investigation on the death of Crisanto Villamor Jr., 42, whom self-confessed gunman Joel Escorial said was among those who contacted him to kill Mabasa.
He asked me to preventively suspend Undersecretary, Director General Gerald Bantag of Bucor, so that there may be a fair, impartial investigation on the matter, so that all doubts will be put to rest that there are no sacred cows in this administration. And at the same time, that he asked me to appoint an OIC in New Bilibid from an order of the President. We'll be appointing Gregorio Catapang Jr. as OIC. October 18, we found out that the gunman had surrendered. And October 19, the PNP, through the Chief of Police of Las Piñas, of Muntinlupa, went to Bilibid to inquire about the identity, about this person, about Crisanto Villamor. And the answer of Bilibid was there's no person by that name inside Bilibid. And it appears that the name in the records of Bilibid is this. June Villamor y Globa. June Villamor y Globa. No? Kasi ito yung mga record niya. Ito yung case management record niya. And there's no name of Crisanto Villamor, but he is the person. One and the same person.
Tatandaan nyo po, 6 po yung sinabi ng ating gunman na sila nagtrabaho. So 2 po itong ating middleman na kumontak po sa kanila. At yung isa nga po ay nadidito po sa BGMP.
Hinayang kami sa nangyaring ito. Sana maunawaan ng lahat na pinaghirapan ito ng kapulisyahan ang kasong ito. Merong autopsy na ginagawa ngayon dahil once talagang merong foul play dito, talagang galit kami.
Well, this is part for the course. If you want an impartial investigation, that's the only thing you can do here. Kasi nga, it's under his jurisdiction, and that's the way it goes naman.
Isinusulong daw ni Cayetano ang
Now, Mabasa, 63, was in his vehicle when gunned down outside the BF Resort Village in Las Piñas City on October 3. There was initial confusion on the identity of Villamor, as records show 3 different names: Crisanto Palara Villamor Jr., June Villamor Y. Globa, and June Villamor Y. Garcia. He reportedly died at the Bucor Hospital on Tuesday afternoon for still unknown reasons. Now, Justice Remulla said they have not talked to Villamor before his death. Another supposed middleman incarcerated in a Taguig jail, Christopher Bacoto, reportedly helped facilitate the killing of Mabasa. Escorial's alleged cohorts, brothers Edmond and Israel Di Maculangan and a certain Orly, are still at large. In other news, a train collided with a tanker truck run over inflamed trucks in Aguascalientes in northern Mexico. The accident led to the evacuation of 300 families. Take a look.
Y bueno, lograron llegar muy rápido para hacer la evacuación de aproximadamente 300 viviendas que se encuentran aquí en la Colonia México, en donde 120 viviendas aproximadamente fueron dañadas. El chofer del camión ahora está en las instancias correspondientes, no le pasó nada más que una lesión en el brazo.
Now, take a look at these. Dramatic video of the fire went viral. It went viral on social media, including aerial shots of black smoke blanketing the large area of the city. This video, shot from a car parked nearby, showed a long cargo train passing through flames on both sides of the track. Reuters news agency said the truck hit an overpass. Authorities are yet to confirm the cause of the explosion, which caused a huge fire, while so far there are no reports of deaths. State oil firm Pemex had said it doesn't own the truck and that it is supporting efforts to control the blaze. Hurricane Rosalind strengthened to Category 3 today, becoming a major storm as it approached Mexico's west coast, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Rosalind continues to rapidly intensify in its latest advisory issued at 0900 GMT, with the storm around 270 kilometers southwest on the port city of Manzanillo. Maximum sustained winds have increased to near 120 miles per hour or 195 kilometers per hour, with higher gusts, the NHC said in its latest advisory, adding the storm was moving northwest at 7 miles per hour, but was expected to turn north and northeast later Saturday and Sunday as it approaches west central Mexico. The NHC warned of flash flooding and landslides caused by the storm. Authorities have declared a preventive alert in the Pacific Coast states of Jalisco, Colima, Nayarit, and Sinaloa. Tropical cyclones hit Mexico every year on both its Pacific and Atlantic coasts, usually between May and November. And moving to Nigeria, where the most severe flooding in the past decade has left more than 2.5 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, fields of sorghum, maize, rice, and vegetables are underwater across Nigeria as farmers warn of an impending food crisis in a country already grappling with the ripple effects of the Russia-Ukraine war. Take a look.
We just learned that at Ibaji now that there is an outbreak of cholera, and which, as of yesterday, the Commissioner for Health and other stakeholders have gone there to see things by themselves.
Honestly, I feel very bad, but there's nothing I can do. I farm a lot of farm. I spend a lot of money for this farm. I spend money no less than 600,000 above.
The floods have affected 34 out of the 36 states so far. 600 people have died and more than 1 million are displaced. Floods are not uncommon in Nigeria during the rainy season from May to November, but they may have been extreme this year. Officials and residents blame climate change, but also poor planning and the release of excessive water from dams, a process that is meant to ease pressure. Ian Fry, UN Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights, said the world is facing its greatest threat ever. Briefing journalists in New York and following the presentation of his report earlier at the General Assembly, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change said that throughout the world, human rights are being violated as a consequence of climate change. Let's listen in.
That climate change is the largest, most pervasive threat to the natural environment and societies that we've ever experienced. And the poorest countries are paying the highest price. There are various human rights being affected as a consequence of climate change: the right to life, health, food, self-determination, water, sanitation, freedom from violence. And we heard yesterday from the Special Rapporteur on violence against women. There is a strong connection between the impacts of climate change, women being put into vulnerable situations because of climate change, and the subject to violence. So there is a massive injustice being manifested by the major economies on the poorest people. The G20 countries, for instance, account for 78% of global emissions over the last decade. We're creating a human rights catastrophe as a consequence of climate change. And the most affected are suffering the greatest loss, but least able to be involved and the least able to participate in current decision making.
Mr. Fry presented several recommendations to the General Assembly, including a proposed high-level mitigation commitment forum to be held in 2023, the establishment of a consultative group of finance experts to define the modalities and rules for the operation of a loss and damage finance facility, and a climate change redress and grievance mechanism to allow vulnerable communities to seek recourse for damages incurred. Back to the U.S., the January 6th committee formally issuing a subpoena for Donald Trump to testify on his involvement in the violence in a major escalation of their sprawling inquiry. Take a look. As demonstrated in our hearings, we have assembled overwhelming evidence, including from dozens of your former appointees and staff, that you personally orchestrated and oversaw a multi-part effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election and to obstruct the peaceful transition of power, the committee told Trump in a letter. Now, Mr. Trump, who urged his supporters to fight like hell in a fiery speech near the White House on January 6, 2021, was impeached for inciting the mob to storm Congress later that day to halt the peaceful transfer of power to Joe Biden. The letter accuses Trump of bidding to overturn the election, despite knowing claims of fraud had been overwhelmingly rejected by more than 60 courts and refuted by his campaign staff and senior advisors. Without confirming Trump had received the subpoena, his lawyer, David Warrington, said his team would review and analyze the document and respond as appropriate to this unprecedented action. In Washington, Mr. Trump's longtime advisor, Steve Bannon, was sentenced to 4 months in prison for refusing to testify to the congressional committee probing the January 6, 2021 attack by Trump supporters on the U.S. Capitol. Take a look.
By the way, I want to say one thing. I respect the judge. The sentence he came down with today is his decision. I fully respect. I've been totally respectful of this entire process on the legal side. The judge, today was my judgment day by the judge. And he stated for the appeal, we'll have a very vigorous appeals process. I've got a great legal team, and there'll be multiple areas of appeal. But, as that sign says right there, can we have the vote sign? On November 8th, on November 8th, there's going to have judgment on the illegitimate Biden regime, and quite frankly, that Nancy Pelosi and the entire committee. And we know which way that's going. On November 8th, the American people will raise judgment, and we will prove the Biden administration ends on the evening of the 8th of November. And let me some other thing is that the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, will end up being the first Attorney General that's brought up on charges of impeachment, and he will be removed from office. Thank you very much.
Is this not interference?
The news continues. You're on Eagle News. We'll be back.
Parenting tips kasama ang pinakasikat na tambalang Mommy and Daddy Diaries PH, Shara and Vlad Magallanes.
Kasi pag nag-give in si Mommy, next time, iisipin na lang yan, ay, iyak na lang ulit ako next time kasi ibibigay naman ni Mommy yung gusto ko. Hindi naman po ipapaalam. Parang ipapaalam mo na, oy, bibiling ko to ha, ganyan.
Okay. Iba yung ipapaalam sa ipapaalam. 1, 2, ay!
Ngayong linggo na yan, 4 to 5 p.m. sa Net25.
Making life extra special.
Welcome back. The falling yen hit 150 per dollar for the first time since 1990, driven down by the contrast between Japanese monetary easing and aggressive U.S. interest rate hikes. The currency has plunged from February levels of around 115 as the Bank of Japan sticks to its long-standing ultra-loose policies designed to encourage sustainable growth in the world's third largest economy. Take a look.
心配なのは逆に円安に触れたら必ず円高にまた戻る局面があると思うんですね。その時にやはりどのぐらいまた戻るか、その辺がちょっと心配ですね。
当然まだこれ以上円安が続くということが予想されますし、今後我々の生活がですね非常に厳しくなるかなということで、大変心配しておる次第です。政府の政策っていうのは当然やってもらわなければならないとは思いますけども、なかなかですね日本国だけでですねこの対処ができるとは思いませんので、やっぱり世界のご協力をですね賜ってそのあたりの為替も安定させていただきたいなというふうには。
I don't think we're surprised. We've seen that the key drivers of the yen depreciation year to date are still very much in play. And we're still seeing kind of higher pressures on US interest rates from domestic-driven inflation in the US. So we expect the Fed to continue in this hawkish vein, with the Bank of Japan very much locked into ultra-loose monetary policy. You know, the pressures are going to continually be there, irrespective of the Bank of Japan's intervention methods, which are merely kind of slowing down the pace of depreciation as opposed to reversing course on the trend that we've seen year to date. So, you know, we're kind of saying if these measures are going to stay in place, which they look like they will do until the end of the year, we're not necessarily going to call the end of the yen depreciation. I think the losers are obviously the Bank of Japan and the Ministry of Finance. I mean, there's a huge credibility issue now to the point that when do they then start to care about inflation pressures? Because inflation is ticking up in Japan. Arguably, it's not coming from kind of core domestic pressures. But what we are seeing globally is that these energy price shocks, for example, in Europe, can have second-round effects, can then migrate out into more components of the CPI basket. And then all of a sudden, you're playing catch-up at a time where, the economic conditions aren't as forgiving as if you are quite preemptive with tackling these inflation problems. I think the Bank of Japan could, if all of a sudden you start to see wage prices tick up or wage pressures tick up, start to see more domestic inflation next year, find itself in a very difficult position. I mean, that the crux of the problem needs to be addressed, and these are only temporary issues. It's like having a filling when you really need a root canal treatment from the dentist here. And fundamentally, the Bank of Japan needs to come in. It needs to address the problems that they currently face in FX markets and say, okay.
Finance Minister Shunichi Suzuki called volatile fluctuations in forex markets absolutely intolerable, reiterating verbal warnings that authorities will take an appropriate response to promote stability. A weaker yen inflates profits for Japanese exporters but can also weigh on the country's trade balance. Japan is heavily reliant on imported energy and also buys in other goods, including much of its food. Japan scrapped its COVID-19 border restrictions and reopened to tourists this month. And many visitors will find shopping, eating out, and domestic travel a bargain, thanks to the weak yen and years of stubbornly low inflation. Prices are now rising in Japan, although at a slower pace than in other major economies. In August, inflation came in at 2.8%, the highest level since 2014, in part because of soaring energy prices linked to the Ukraine war. Now, Raz and Adaret are having to check their receipts very carefully when they go shopping. They've gradually started to cut out items from their shopping list due to inflation. Now, these students are having to worry about the rise in prices and the high cost of living instead of focusing on their studies in Israel. Take a look.
אנחנו כמובן מחפשים דברים שיהיו זולים, שיהיו בגבול של המותר. בהתחלה אתה קונה דברים שנראה לך שהם בסדר, שהם בתקציב, ולאט לאט אתה מגלה שזה מחוץ לתקציב. אתה מצמצם, אתה אומר בסדר, אז סלטים אני עושה רק מעגבניות ובצל, כי מלפפונים זה לא נצרך לסלט. אם לא סיימתי משהו השבוע, אני יודע שהשבוע הבא אין מצב שאני אקנה אותו. תיף הרבה לחץ, הרבה בלגן, שהיינו שמחים להתמודד יותר עם הלימודים ועם הדברים שאנחנו חווים ביחד ומתקדמים, וזה מוסיף המון סטרס. יש הרבה לחץ שמתווסף של רגע, אז עכשיו אפשר לקנות את זה, אפשר לקנות את זה.
According to the Times of Israel, interest rates in Israel remain lower than in many other countries. In the U.S., where inflation remains over 8%, the current rate is 3.5%. In China, 3.6%. In Canada, 3.25%. And in South Africa, 6.25%. The Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, or EVAP, is calling on both the public and private sectors for the adoption of electric vehicles in the country's transportation system by building charging stations and other supporting infrastructures. The 10th Philippine Electric Vehicle Summit was just held last October 20 and 21 at the SMX Convention Center in Manila. Take a look.
Please. Just in a glance about the ASEAN Center for Energy, we was established in 1999 by the 10 ASEAN member states. We represent the interests of the 10 ASEAN member states in the energy sector. And we receive political support from ASEAN member states, including support from dialogue partners and international organizations. We receive mandates from the member states as catalytic role to expand collaboration and cooperation like we have today with AFIVA. Hopefully we can increase more connection for EV utilization in the region. Secondly, as a data and knowledge hub, we would like to provide knowledge repository for all ASEAN member states. EE is the way of life. I think this is something that we need to utilize in the individual level, corporate level, also in the regional level. Assessed by 2025, transportation will contribute to 28.7% of greenhouse gas emission, second largest share behind electricity generation. So this is an important note for us. So transformation is needed to reduce GHG emission for the region.
We need to base our investment decisions, of course, on expectations, how we think that the market will develop. And it is now figures in scenarios as we see the ASEAN region. You see in the green color the percentage of pure electric vehicles, and that is what we talk about here at this event, and that's where we are preparing ourselves. So at the moment, 2022, only 1% of pure electric vehicles sold in the ASEAN region, a very low percentage, not a business case. However, we see it now really picking up, getting up steeply. By 2030, we expect about 1/4 of new vehicle sales will be pure electric, not even counting the hybrids, so the green color in that chart here. That is based a lot on government policies. For example, in Thailand, we have the program of 30% zero-emission vehicle production by 2030. We think those policies will have an effect, and we see the volumes really going up like that. The whole development is going on a global scale, and as you see here, the world average. Above average would be the regions of China, also Western Europe, definitely. But the message is it's a global trend. We see that coming everywhere. The industry are preparing themselves, not only my company, we're all now investing our future into electric cars.
The two-day EV summit has gathered business and government leaders who are openly backing electromobility adoption. During the opening rites, EVAP conferred recognitions to partners that have been extending unwavering support to the cause. Meanwhile, British luxury car manufacturer Rolls-Royce introduced its Spectre, its first fully electric vehicle, which the company's CEO Torsten Müller-Ötvös hails as a first step towards the brand's objective to sell only electric cars by 2030. Take a look.
Spectre is the first and finest super luxury electric car ever built. And Spectre represents the first step in delivering the promise I made to make Rolls-Royce a fully electric brand by 2030. Spectre is, I call it, just the beginning of Rolls-Royce's bold electric future and a significant statement of intent, I can tell you. By 2024, we expect around 20% of the new cars we sell will be fully electric. And I reckon that by 2028, that figure will rise to 70%. At the end of this decade, so 2030, all cars built by Rolls-Royce will be fully electric. And this secures, obviously, the future of this great institution, Rolls-Royce Motor Cars, and obviously also our long-term sustained global growth.
France and the Philippines are set to feature arts, culture, and cuisine as they highlighted the diversity of their 75-year-old relations from October to January next year. In a presser, French Ambassador to the Philippines, Michel Bocoz, and Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary Jaime Victor Leda presented the lineup of activities that highlight French and Filipino collaboration. Let's listen in.
We decided not to do it on one year. So since the inauguration last June at the Pinto Museum with more than 600 guests and an exhibition dedicated to Filipino painters who lived in France and French who lived in the Philippines, including, by the way, also sculptures by Paul Gauguin and some beautiful drawings as well, with the exceptional presence of the French world champion volleyball team. We continue ever since to celebrate the 75th anniversary, both here and in France, as well as the Embassy of the Philippines. But the reason why we are here today actually is to talk to you about the upcoming events that will mark this last quarter. We will talk in a few minutes about many different areas. Gastronomy, awards for alumni, exhibition, comics, cinema, economy, fashion, contemporary dance, art on the bay, digital, climate change, sustainable agriculture in the Barn region, street art, songs, photos, sports, decathlon inclusion day, circus, club.
Now, the celebration will reach its peak this month with 4 major events planned to inspire the public, such as the Marcel Proust-inspired art exhibit called In Search of Lost Time by Stefan Hewitt that opened on October 16. Other events will be held in November and December, with a closing ceremony to be conducted around the middle of January. In tonight's other news, the World Health Organization said it's too early to lift the highest level alert for the COVID crisis. It said that despite recent progress, the pandemic remains a global health emergency. The WHO's Emergency Committee on COVID-19 met last week, and they concluded that the pandemic still constitutes a public emergency of international concern, a status it declared back in January 2020. Take a look.
Last week, the Emergency Committee on COVID-19 met to discuss the global situation and the way forward. The committee's view is that COVID-19 remains a public health emergency of international concern, and I agree. The committee emphasized the need to strengthen surveillance and expand access to tests, treatments, and vaccines for those most at risk, and for all countries to update their national preparedness and response plans.
It is too early to terminate the public health emergency of international concern. There are still too many deaths. There are still too much uncertainty regarding the variant, their pathogenic effect, the immune escape effect, and there is still too much fear that termination of the fake might aggravate existing inequalities in access to vaccine or therapeutics and might demobilize all the efforts engaged to prepare for a future pandemic.
Since the start of the pandemic, more than 622 million confirmed cases have been reported to WHO and more than 6.5 million deaths, although those numbers are believed to be significant underestimates. The Omicron variant accounts for basically all virus samples that are sequenced, with more than 300 sublineages of that variant recorded. In light of the broad spread of new Omicron subvariants, the WHO stressed that countries need to be in a position to conduct surveillance to deal with increases in cases and perhaps deal with increases in hospitalizations. Now, the UN chief said too little is being invested globally in the systems needed for people's health and well-being. Global health security and preparedness need to be strengthened through sustained political commitment and leadership. Let's take a look.
In a video message, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres tells global leaders at the World Health Summit in Berlin, Germany, that physical and mental health are the foundation for peaceful, sustainable societies. Guterres warns that we live in a time of great risk and uncertainty. He mentions how poorly prepared the world was, as demonstrated during the pandemic. The UN chief says women shoulder an increased burden of care in families and as frontline workers. He says many women have endured significant income reduction due to job losses and the absence of adequate social safety nets. Guterres says the pandemic and current world crisis have delayed the push for the Sustainable Development Agenda.
The COVID-19 pandemic, along with the current food, energy and financial crisis, has set back efforts to reduce poverty and hunger and implement the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. To advance the Sustainable Development Goals, we must recalibrate multilateralism and strengthen global cooperation.
He says global health security and preparedness need to be strengthened through sustainable political commitment and leadership. The UN chief calls on governments to give priority to health He also appeals to wealthier countries and international financial institutions, saying they need to support developing countries to make those crucial investments. Guterres says everyone needs inclusive, impartial, and equitable access to health services to deliver universal health coverage. He underscores the must to ensure mental health is not a neglected aspect of healthcare. Rosel Ferrio, Washington, D.C. Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Meanwhile, researchers at Europe Science Lab CERN, who regularly use particle physics to challenge our understanding of the universe, are now also applying their craft to push the boundaries of cancer treatment. The physicists here are working with giant particle accelerators in search of ways to expand the reach of cancer radiation therapy and take on hard-to-reach tumors that could otherwise be fatal. Take a look.
Experts from CERN and the Lausanne University Hospital, CHUV, are designing an innovative facility. The facility treats with very short bursts of high-energy electrons. Accelerated using linear electron accelerator technology, developed at CERN for CLIC, a new compact linear collider. The beam of very high-energy electrons splits into separate paths before being injected into the treatment area, delivering a fully guided dose to large, deep-seated tumours in less than 200 milliseconds. This innovative flash treatment is able to spare surrounding healthy tissue and give better clinical results than conventional radiotherapy treatments. A full dose is delivered in less than 200 milliseconds and is able to treat large and deep-seated tumours while sparing healthy tissue.
It has been shown that if you concentrate the total dose that you typically need to treat a tumor in a very short time, then the treatment of the tumor is exactly the same. So you destroy with the same effectiveness the tumor, but the biological effect on the healthy tissue is reduced. This means that basically you can increase the dose and destroy tumors that now resist without having the same kind of damage to the healthy tissue around. Or cure the tumor as is cured today, but with less repercussions on the health of the patient given directly by the irradiation. It will allow to extend to radiotherapy the treatment of tumors that now cannot be treated by radiotherapy because they are too close to a sensitive organ, or that they are radio-resistant, so you would need to increase the dose to a level that then would be detrimental to the healthy tissue that is close by. So the idea is not to change completely the game, but to extend a lot the usability of radiotherapy for a number of cancers that now are treated only through chemicals, basically. Brain tumor might be indeed a very good area of application because, yes, there is really the need to concentrate only on the tumor, the damage, let's say, and the kind of area is also large, but not too large to really need a high intensity that is not reachable even with electrons.
The one which we don't cure at the moment, which will be the target. And for those particular cancer, which may be, 1/3 of the cancers, it could be a game changer, but probably not all of them, but at least there will be a new opportunity for more cure, if it were.
And finally, the Unity Games kicked off in Nagoya, Japan. Here's Lou Omelda.
October 10th is an official national holiday in Japan called the Sports Day. And it is also the day that the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo chose to conduct their much-awaited sports event after 4 years into the pandemic. "11 teams from the different parts of Japan gathered on a rainy morning here at Nagahama Gymnastics Center to participate in different sports events, namely basketball, volleyball, chess, and tug of war. After
After the parade of the players and participants, the games were commenced right away, starting with basketball and volleyball games, while the young members enjoyed some fun games. It's been more than 3 years since the pandemic began, and all sports gatherings like this were banned due to health and safety risks. Now that the restrictions have been eased, more organizations like the Iglesia ni Cristo are conducting these kinds of sports events. Participants from Kyushu traveled more than 6 hours to participate in this event. Their members from the Kansai, Chubu, and other regions also traveled early to join the games. Many are not professional athletes or don't even have enough experience competing in the sports mentioned. However, everyone tried to practice hard and actively participate in these activities.
私はユニテゲームスは兄弟姉妹たちとの仲を深めることができるので、とてもいい行事だと思います。
According to some members, this sports event has been a yearly activity for the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo around the world for many years now. And being able to finally have the Unity Games in their area after being postponed many times due to COVID is a blessing to them and something that they have been praying for.
We're grateful to our Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo Manalo, and also to our CFO Coordinator, Brother Angelo Manalo, to have this Unity Games, to bring brethren from different places in our district, bring them together, showcase their talents, and of course, prove our absolute unity and our brotherhood. We can't ask for more than this because we are so happy seeing our brethren after the pandemic, after 3 years of not having face-to-face activities. All we can say is we're grateful to our church administration.
This is Lucifer Nomelda, and we live in interesting times.
Thanks, Lou. As always, I'll end the week on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.